Hey everyone, this is Rahul with the Alternative Investors Hangout, and today we have a returning guest. He is my relative. He is Amar, and thanks for coming on again, Amar.
Thanks a lot for having me again, Rahul. It's great to be back.
All right. We had many conversations about fascism, socialism, communism, and all that beforehand, and I wanted to get into this topic of, number one, fascism. And it seems that ever since the 1930s, what has happened is we have moved towards more of a collective model. People are saying that FDR was a socialist, and then a few generations later they're saying that Obama is a socialist, but if you think about it and look at it closely, they're not socialists. I would call them fascists.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of FDR and our current president, President Obama, I think you're right. There are certain things that they have in common very much with fascism, especially FDR. The modern Democrat Party looks to FDR as a major model, a major source of inspiration, and as a president to emulate. Ever since him, the Democrat Party has been aspiring for more policies along the lines of FDR's New Deal, which was very much inspired by the fascism of Italy at the time under Mussolini. Mussolini's ideas. That's Benito Mussolini, the fascist leader of Italy. His ideas were in vogue during his time, and remain so. Although modern day advocates of his policies will not invoke his name.
Indeed. And you told me a quote, number one, about fascism. Do you remember that a long time ago?
Well, yeah, that's right.
Could you say that for the audience of what you told me?
Sure. And it can go along these lines. See if you can guess who said the following quote. And I'm just bringing it up. It's just one moment. I won't give it a year or I won't give you any hints, but I'll say one part of it, and then I'll let the listeners see if they can come up with the speaker of this quote, starting now. So the quote is this: "Millions of unemployed must get their jobs back, and this cannot be left to private initiative. It is the government that must tackle the problem." So I wonder if anyone... See, all those in our audience, see if you can guess who said that. There's one more sentence before that. "We are dealing with the greatest social problems ever known. Millions of unemployed must get their jobs back, and this cannot be left to private initiative. It is the government that must tackle the problem." See if you can guess who said that. And if you're having trouble with that, I'll give you a little hint. So this is the beginning of the quote. The quote itself begins like this: "I am very interested in social developments in America. I believe that President Roosevelt has chosen the right path." And then it continues: "We are dealing with the greatest social problems ever known. Millions of unemployed must get their jobs back, and this cannot be left to private initiative. It is the government that must tackle the problem." So now you and I, Rahul, had this conversation before, but I can reveal the name of the person who said this whenever you feel it's appropriate.
All right.
Well, how about now?
Yes, say it now.
That would be, if you'd guessed Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda for Nazi Germany in 1934, you would be right. That was Joseph Goebbels. And the Nazi movement had a great deal of admiration for FDR's policies. The official gazette of the Nazi movement was praising him. And you can read more about this in an excellent book entitled Three New Deals. That's Three New Deals by Wolfgang Scheivelbusch, or if it were German, Wolfgang Scheivelbusch. That's WOLFGANG SCHIVELBUSCH. Three New Deals: Reflections on Roosevelt's America, Mussolini's Italy, and Hitler's Germany, 1933 to 1939. you'll see that these three movements, the Nazi movement, the Italian fascist movement, and FDR's New Deal, had a great deal in common when it came to how to run an economy and how to do what Joseph Goebbels was saying, getting millions of unemployed back to work. So these are not isolated. This is not some isolated scurrilous quote. This was a very prominent view in the Nazi movement, which we find in the Nazi Gazette of the same time. That quote was from 1934.
Adding on,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so why did these three movements have so much in common? Well, we can go back to what the terms right wing and left wing mean. And right wing and left wing, as I said last time, are basically European concepts. They are not the principles upon which this country was founded, which is a whole different axis, that being classical liberalism, the way of liberty for every individual. Both right wing and left wing are two different competing forms of despotism, and they do fight each other. The fascists of Italy and the Nazis of Germany certainly did fight the communists within their countries. They did oppose them. In fact, Mussolini was killed by communists, though they had similar goals, similar despotic goals. They were just two competing despotisms with different philosophies on how to govern. Those two different philosophies on how to govern emanating from their different views of human civilization. Human civilization being based upon three salient things, those being traditional religion, that's number one, marriage and family, that's number two, and labor and industry, number three, or private property, this is getting at the same thing. So religion, marriage and family, and private property. Those three things are the foundational pillars, the three foundational pillars of all civilization, whether we're talking about ancient Egypt or ancient China or a medieval kingdom or the United States. Any civilization in the world is based upon those three things: religion, marriage and family, and private property. So where do right and left differ? They differ in their approaches to those three pillars. The traditional way of controlling a society was what we would today call the right-wing way, and that is to co-opt traditional religion, insert the leader into the traditional religion, such as through the divine right of kings. With marriage and family, the approach was to coerce people, coercively engineer or coercively manipulate the institutions of marriage and family to make them work for the despot. And private property, the right-wing way, the old traditional way, was to manipulate property owners, to make them do what the despot wants them to do. So co-opt, coerce, manipulate, those three things: traditional religion, marriage and family, and private property. That is the traditional right-wing way of controlling a society. And in so doing, the government creates and maintains and solidifies a social hierarchy, a very strict social hierarchy, which places the rulers at the top, and those who are undesirable at the very bottom. So in Nazi Germany, the undesirables would have been the Jews, Slavs, other minorities in their growing empire, and so that is the right-wing way. I can go into more detail on that. I have plenty of material to share with you on that. That is the right-wing way. Now, the fascists, they followed that mold, that right-wing, that traditional, time-tested right-wing approach to controlling a society. What did they do? The fascists, we're talking about the Italian fascists, the German Nazis. We can talk about both of them right now. The Italian fascists, okay, let's talk about traditional religion, the first pillar of human civilization. What did they do with traditional religion? They would co-opt traditional religion to justify the state's despotic power. Let's look at the Italian fascists in that area. What they did is, through the Lateran Treaties of 1929, they made Roman Catholicism the official religion of the Kingdom of Italy. Italy was a kingdom at that time officially. And they paid the Catholic Church large sums of money in exchange for its loyalty and its acquiescence to the fascist program. Those large sums of money were paid to the Catholic Church in exchange for land that the Church lost in 1861 when it lost the Papal States to this new Kingdom of Italy, this unified kingdom. Okay, so they co-opted the Roman Catholic Church. They made it the official religion. anytime you hear of an official religion that's a traditional religion, we're talking the right-wing approach to controlling a society. Okay, then the Nazis, the German Nazis, what did they do in the area of religion? Well, they supported a church called the German Evangelical Church, which was a Protestant church, specifically Protestant church, also known as the Reich Protestant Church, which had a doctrine of racial purity, which they called positive Christianity, doctrine of racial purity. They were throwing out a lot of the moralistic beliefs of Christianity and reducing it to a sort of racial belief system. And they installed a Reich bishop as the bishop of this new German empire, and that man's name was Ludwig Müller. So they too, the German Nazis also co-opted traditional religion to justify their despotic power, to give it a traditional seal of approval, and to make them the recognized rulers of those who believed in religion in their respective domains. So that was traditional religion. The next thing, marriage and family. What did the Italian fascists do, and what did the German Nazis do? Well, what they both did was they coercively engineered marriage and family to fulfill the state's objectives. These were generally racial objectives, ethnic objectives. So let's look at the Italian fascists first. What they did is they put the Catholic Church in full control of marriage in Italy. And women were heavily persuaded through a great deal of propaganda, state-financed propaganda, and they were financially incentivized to simply leave their jobs so that men could take those jobs, and so that the women could stay at home and serve as what they called reproducers of the nation. So women were incentivized financially and through other means to stay at home and just be the traditional mothers, caregivers for children, and raisers of the next generation. So in that way, they were coercively engineering marriage and family, not destroying family altogether, not destroying marriage, but coercively engineering it, saying, hey, women, stay at home and be mothers. Men, go out and work. And
hold up a second. Sorry to interrupt. Like in America, it seemed that the opposite was happening, because ever since the 1930s, it just seemed that the fascists in control in the United States, what they were doing is quite the opposite, because what ended up happening slightly over time is that now women, instead of having children and trying to raise their kids properly, now they were forced to go into the workforce. Not if there's anything wrong if they stay at home or if they work. It just seems that because of Keynesianism, because of more government intervention, which started under FDR, it seems that what has happened is that now women are forced to work full-time in order to raise a family, and that has, in my opinion, destroyed, number one, the family structure, and it has created all sorts of problems in America. Do you see it that way too?
I think there have been a lot of things, a lot of factors that have caused the breakup of the family in our country. I think I've seen a plot from a well-reputed source of the rates of marriage of people younger than the age of 30. I believe it peaked around the year 1910. Approximately 90% of people under the age of 30 were married, and today that number is about 31%. So it has definitely declined over time. I personally don't know how much the fascist policies of the New Deal and subsequent administrations of big government, progressive expansionism has affected that. I do think it has, though. I wouldn't be able to give a whole lot of specifics, but it's true now that to have the kind of lifestyle that folks had maybe 100 years ago, where people could own land fairly easily in many parts of the country, it has become a distant dream for people unless they have two incomes. And in other words, if there's a husband and wife working. So we do see that. Now, I think the FDR New Deal movement was right-wing in the third way, which I haven't yet gotten to, and that's in manipulating labor and industry to make them serve the state's interests. So in the first two ways, I don't see how FDR co-opted traditional religion, for example. I don't see how he personally coercively engineered marriage and family. Okay, so I don't see the New Deal as having taken on those two aspects of the fascist agenda. But the third we see a lot of that in the New Deal, that being manipulating labor and industry. So I think FDR in the New Deal was not fully right-wing, but in the economic sphere, the sphere of private property, it certainly was. So if we look at the Italian fascists, for example, they practiced what they called their third way, what they called an alternative to capitalism and Marxism, in which state planners would command private corporations to produce goods and services. And the German Nazis, they gave us, they practiced Hitler's 4-year plan, which came out in 1936, which controlled the production of all raw materials such as iron and rubber, also all food production, with this justification right from the 4-year plan, which can be seen as basically a textbook definition of fascism. And I'll give you the quote from the 4-year plan. Quote, "It is for the Ministry of Economics simply to set the national economic tasks, and it is for private industry to carry them out." There you have it. That in one sentence is a fairly decent working definition of fascism in the economic sphere, in the sphere of private property. So we do see marriage now. The German Nazis, to go back to marriage and family, they did things similar to the Italian fascists. They had this award called the Cross of Honor of the German Mother, which was given to women who bore 4 or more children. And the more children they had, the higher the level of the award. They also had this program called the Lebensborn program, where they would breed children, literally, of pure race. So they wanted to have more children, and encourage families to have more and more young, pure race children in their view. So now marriage being broken up, we can possibly look to statist economic policies, fascist type economic policies. I think the main culprit has been leftism, and its various forms. Margaret Sanger, the founder of an organization which later became Planned Parenthood, which is the largest performer of abortions in America, was promoting this idea of birth control, and was a feminist. So feminism was on the rise in America. Feminism sought to liberate, quote unquote, liberate women from patriarchy, from the bonds of marriage and motherhood. I think that movement, the feminist movement, has had a big effect on family in America and marriage rates, fertility rates, and other things. So that's something we need to consider. When we look at this, and when we look at Margaret Sanger was a big fan. She was a Democrat and a big fan of Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was also very much a statist in the economic sphere and in other ways. Woodrow Wilson, for example, enacted the Sedition Act, which made it a crime in 1918 to criticize the government, even in private spheres. I'm sure the law was very selectively enforced, but there was a Sedition Act before that, the Espionage Act. So we had a sort of police state under Woodrow Wilson, and people like Margaret Sanger, feminists like Margaret Sanger, supported him. So
wasn't Sanger a racist against blacks?
Absolutely. She was a eugenicist, and she was promoting birth control as a way to create a more pure race. And she said this frequently. You notice this. The left, Margaret Sanger is a big hero to the left, but leftists and pro-abortion activists never quote her. They will never quote her because even though she was one of the most prolific writers in history, in American history, she founded several newsletters, she wrote books, she gave many speeches across the country. They will never quote her because her writings and her speeches are filled with this racist rhetoric. She gave speeches to the KKK. This is from her own diary, from her own memoirs, that is. And so she is not quoted. She is someone who is certainly a hero for promoting birth control. She passed away in 1966. I think although early on I think she opposed abortion. Later she certainly did support abortion. her organization, the organization which she founded, which later became Planned Parenthood, is the largest, as I mentioned, largest performer of abortions in America. And according to studies, 79% of all of Planned Parenthood's facilities in America are located
in the inner city, right? In African American neighborhoods.
African American and Latino communities, yes. So our fellow Americans who are white Americans, make up of something like 60-some% of the population, yet 79% of the facilities of Planned Parenthood are in predominantly minority areas. So that's very telling.
That is telling. And I did want to get into another topic about FDR and how it probably plays out to today. I was looking at the New Deal, and before it was architected, or before it was constructed, you had, I think his name was Gerard Swoops. He was the CEO of General Electric, and he basically planned out some sort of New Deal plan under Hoover, but it got actually implemented, I believe, under FDR. And once that happened, it just seems that you've had bigger government colluding with bigger businesses, and then you could see right now with Obama's insurance plan right now, you see all these big insurance companies benefiting off of that because you have all these rules and regulations in Obamacare. And what's that doing is that it makes it a lot difficult for smaller hospitals to compete. They're probably going to have to go bankrupt, or you're going to see some other facilities. I could talk about this later in detail, but there's this surgical center of Oklahoma, which is only a cash basis hospital. And hospitals like those need to prop up because what's going to happen is you're just going to have a crazy pricing mechanism when it comes to healthcare, and it's just going to be a lot more expensive down the road. But what I'm trying to get at is, though, under these progressives, guys like FDR and Obama, you just see the collusion of big businesses and big government, and that's just screwing over the common guy.
Oh, very much so. If we look at Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, what was it? It was essentially a big present to the insurance companies. You notice when there was a great deal of discussion in the country, and mainly from the Democrat side, on this proposed legislation, there was a lot of demonization of the health insurance companies. Now you notice very few health insurance companies said anything, protested those demonizations. And I think I think the reason is that it became clear to them that this was a present for them, and now everybody has to buy their product, whereas before there was no penalty for not engaging in the commercial act of purchasing health insurance, but now there is a penalty. So clearly a major beneficiary, perhaps the beneficiary of Obamacare, is the insurance companies collectively. And it is certainly going to make things difficult for the common person. It was never intended to solve our healthcare problems or to make healthcare more affordable. It was, in fact, it seems very clear now, after we heard the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, not too long ago say on a televised program in Nevada that the Health Care Act that he helped push through was absolutely a step on the path to a single-payer healthcare system. That's our American term for a government-run healthcare system, similar to what exists in many European countries. So it was never intended to make healthcare more accessible or more affordable, but to be that stepping stone to a single-payer system. And they're using these health insurance companies temporarily as a stepping stone to get there. See, the interesting thing about these two forms of despotism, the right-wing and the left-wing forms of despotism, is that their ultimate goal is control of society. And that being the case, they will be happy to borrow ideas from one another from time to time if it suits their purpose. For example, I would say that President Obama, if we look at his upbringing and his influences in life, he's had a lot of left-wing influences, very hard left influences, even communistic influences. His pastor, Reverend Wright, was influenced by liberation theology, which looks to liberate the oppressed of the world, the poor people of the world, from poverty and oppression by the richer countries of the world, the white countries, so-called white countries. So he's steeped in leftism in various ways, but in other ways he's practicing a soft form of fascism. He said when he ran for president in 2008 that by his policies, the coal industry, for example, would be bankrupt. He said that they would be bankrupted. Now, on the other hand, with his stimulus package, he gave approximately $90 billion to various so-called green industries, green companies, like Solyndra, which failed, which ended up laying people off, and many of those other 34 approximately companies that ended up laying people off or going bankrupt, or both. And that is a kind of fascism. That is government determining who the winners and losers are going to be based on the government's agenda. If we go back to that quote from Hitler's 4-year plan from 1936, the quote says, "It is for the Ministry of Economics simply to set the national economic tasks, and it is for private industry to carry them out." We're talking about here a close partnership between government and private industry. Now, not outright ownership necessarily of the means of production, the capital, the private property, but a control nonetheless of private property and the means of production, that being capital. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And before I let you go, Amar,
and if I may interject,
yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Just
so is
give
it
your final thoughts.
Sure. Is it clear to you what I said about fascism, how it is right wing, how it co-opts traditional religion, how it coercively engineered marriage and family, and how it manipulates labor and industry, as opposed to the left? The left seeks to attack, undermine, and destroy those same 3 pillars of civilization. It seeks to attack traditional religion, undermine marriage and family, and destroy and or undermine and attack the institution of private property. That's left-wing, the left-wing form of despotism, as opposed to the right-wing form of despotism. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You lay it out pretty well compared to most people. So.
Terrific. Because the terms socialism and fascism are thrown around a lot, and we really need to be clear as to what they are if we're going to use those terms.
I completely agree. And
so I interrupted you, so please go ahead. Yes.
Oh, go ahead. You could, if you have something else to say, we could.
Oh no, you were starting something, and I interjected. So please proceed.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Yeah, I just wanted to say that thanks for coming on again. And then, do you have anything else to say before we let you go?
Well, I can say one thing. We talked about the right, we talked about the left. Well, what is our country, the United States of America, based upon? And that is this philosophy of classical liberalism. Now, I could go into some of the salient ins and outs of this philosophy. I'll give you just one quote from Adam Smith from his book, The Wealth of Nations. This is, for those who are interested, this is from book number 4 and chapter 9 of The Wealth of Nations. Well, to set up this quote, we hear a lot about limited government, that America is founded upon limited government. That was the vision of the founders of our country. The founding fathers sought limited government, not no government, not despotic government, but limited. But what does limited government mean? Every 2 to 4 years, politicians run for office and they say, "I'm for limited government." Okay, well, how can we hold them to that if we don't know what limited government means? Does that mean that we should have had a health care law that was only 2,000 pages in length rather than 2,400 pages in length or 2,700 pages in length, which it was? Does that mean that the highest tax bracket should be only 30% rather than the 36.5% or whatever it is at the federal level? What does limited government mean? What do we mean when we say government needs to be limited? Well, I'll give you this quote from Adam Smith, and this will give us some insight. Okay, so here's the quote. "According to the system of natural liberty, the sovereign," okay, and by the sovereign he means the king, but we can take that to mean simply the government. "The sovereign has only 3 duties to attend to. Only 3 duties to attend to. 3 duties of great importance, indeed, but plain and intelligible to common understandings. And here they are. First, the duty of protecting the society from the violence and invasion of other independent societies. Okay, so what is that? National defense. Protect the country. Okay, number 2. Secondly, the duty of protecting, as far as possible, every member of the society from the injustice or oppression of every other member of it, or the duty of establishing an exact administration of justice. So quick commentary on that. That is to protect people from the fraud and violence of other people and from the fraud and violence of the government. That's the second duty of government, according to the system of natural liberty. And then continuing on. And thirdly, the duty of erecting and maintaining certain public works and certain public institutions which it can never be for the interest of any individual or small number of individuals to erect and maintain, though it may frequently do much more than repay its costs to a great society. The proper performance of those several duties necessarily supposes a certain expense which necessarily requires a certain revenue to support it. And that's the end of the quote. So 3 things. Government's job is to protect the country from violence and invasion of other independent societies. The second duty, protect people from the fraud and violence and injustice and oppression of every other member of it, including of the government, through an exact administration of justice, that is, through a court system. And third, erect and maintain certain public works and certain public institutions which an individual or a small number of individuals would have a very difficult time erecting and maintaining and profiting from, but which the society as a whole can benefit from and can profit from. Things such as a post office or a copyright office or a patent office, various things like that. And the list can go on and on. But that is one vision of limited government, according to a major economist and classical liberal philosopher, Adam Smith, and that's from his Wealth of Nations. So that's I'll leave that as something for folks to think about. What do we really mean by limited government? What is this alternative to all forms of despotism, right wing and left wing, that the founders of this country gave us, that they enacted through classical liberalism as their guiding philosophy and federalism as a form of government that they put into practice and codified. So I'll just close with that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then one last thing before I let you go. A lot of people thought that we're cousins. We're not actually cousins. I mean, my dad and you are second cousins, I believe. So if you ever have kids, then your kids would be third cousins with me. So just wanted to put that out there.
That's right. And we say that I am your father's second cousin to make it clear, because this once removed sort of business doesn't say who's on what level, so to speak, if you know it, who's on what generational level. So to be precise, you said that I am your father's second cousin. Now, some may call some may say that we are second cousins once removed, but that doesn't say who's of what generation. So for clarity's sake, I think you said it the right way.
Awesome. And yeah, I need to bring you on again, and I'm going to bring on your friend Jeffrey. I forgot his last name. He's a broker, but he seems to think a lot like us, so I think he'd be a good guest on my program. Yeah,
Jeffrey Borneman, terrific guy, and he has a lot of interesting things to say about metals, defense, food, and other industries that he focuses on.
Indeed. Yeah, hope to have you on soon, Amar.
Terrific. Thanks very much for having me on, Raul.